Welcome back to another episode on the channel, guys. I've labeled this section of the channel Inside Tips, which actually corresponds to a podcast that's live both on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. So if you like this content and you want to be able to take it on the go, I'd encourage you to go over there to either Apple Podcasts or Spotify and check out Inside Tips. On this episode today, I got to sit down with the lead singer of a band named Valleyheart. His name is Kevin Klein, and we got to really get into it and dissect the differences between being signed and being independent, and a lot of the similarities as well. Kevin spent a long time as being part of an independent band, both with Valleyheart as well as with a solo project before that, and another band before that solo project. So we just got to kind of soak in the experiences and knowledge and wisdom he's gained over the years of the similarities and the differences he sees between being a signed artist and independent artist. And the purpose of this video is to really speak into the false narrative that happens a lot of times for you and I as independent musicians, which is that we believe that being signed fixes all of our problems. So without any further delay, here's my interview with Kevin Klein about the differences and similarities between being a signed artist and being an independent one.
Dude, so how long have you been back from, was it Dominican Republic you were out to?
Peru.
Oh, Peru?
Yeah,
Dang,
Peru.
man. So how long you been home?
Came back April 2nd, so over a month now. Yeah, it's been a while.
So, like, give me the lowdown. What was that like? I mean, I was thinking to myself, like, that must really stink. I mean, if my wife and I took a vacation, it would be like, you know, we'd have just enough money to be able to stay there the time we planned on. So if we were stuck in a situation, I'd be like running up a credit card bill.
Oh, dude. I mean, yes, but luckily things are really cheap, relatively cheap there.
Okay.
And, you know, we had planned on doing so many excursions and, like, you know, doing all that stuff. And because of the lockdown, 4 or 5 days into our trip, we didn't get to do any of that stuff. So the money part kind of leveled out because leveled out, you know, and like you and like people like supporting us was huge, because our biggest expense was the Airbnb that we had to stay for like, you know, 3 weeks, with really that was like a huge expense. So in some ways it was more, but because we did stay longer than anticipated.
Yeah.
But dude, luckily it all worked out. Luckily it all panned out. She got home safe and I got home safe, and we're actually from different countries, so we took different flights back, and that was worried, like, being separated, but it all panned out, and we're both back in our respective homes.
Dang, man. That's quite the adventure, huh?
Yeah, definitely. It was crazy. It was a crazy time.
Dang, man. So I know. So what are you up to right now? As far as I'd seen stuff on Facebook of you working as a bartender, kind of doing craft drinks and all that kind of stuff. And so what's your day-to-day look like right now with the Corona stuff?
Well, with Corona stuff, it looks like me eating a pint of cookies and creams, Jerry's, and watching Netflix and maybe writing a song. But before that, it was I bartend locally, just at like a craft cocktail kind of place. And I do it a few days a week, and I do it along with music stuff, and kind of started to do some production stuff with people. So yeah, I only do it like 3 or 4 days a week, but it's something I enjoy doing. It's awesome. It's fun. It's nice. But you know, lots changing now. I don't know what that's going to look like. You know, I mean, even when things go back, like the restaurant industry in general is changing, you know, immensely. I mean, people going back, enjoying something like a dine-in experience at like a place like I work is like a kind of called fine dining. So it's like, you know, for people who are like trying to splurge, and like, I don't think that splurge mentality is going to be something that's going to be sticking with us for a while. And maybe that might be great, but I mean, it's really interesting time, I think, for a lot of restaurant industry people. And I think a lot of people are figuring out what they're going to do next.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, seriously. So you've been doing production stuff as well. So you've been doing like kind of supplemental income, just like mixing and producing for people.
Exactly. Yeah. Sweet. Just, you know, mixing, but also just like meeting up with people and doing like production stuff, going to different studios, kind of putting on different hats in terms of like producer or engineer, like learning a little bit more about the engineering side of things, which has been really fun. Yeah, it's something I always kind of did on my own for myself, like pre-production, but it's something that I realized I really enjoy doing as well for other people. So, just kind of doing that supplementally and seeing where it goes.
Yeah, which actually, you mentioning producing actually brought up a question I had from, you're familiar with a producer called Jake Rye? You familiar with him?
Jake Rye, no.
You ever heard of the band Michigander? They're kind of like
Oh, but I don't. Are they from Michigan?
Yeah. Yeah, so they're part of like the like the Midwest, like indie scene sort of thing. Obviously
Okay.
they're from Michigan. It'd be kind of
Yeah.
inappropriate for them to be called that. But
I mean,
he's
that'd be kind of cool. Like, we got you. We're from Arizona.
right, yeah. Yeah, so I've been talking with him because he's a great producer. He was the bass player for Sanctus Real, and then he left them
Yeah.
and started producing on his own. So
Dude, that's so funny you mentioned Sanctus Real. I like after years when I was listening to that band, like a couple days ago, like I was just in a mood and I like jammed their whole like first album or something.
oh, no way.
Yeah, it's so funny that you said that.
That is funny, dude. Honestly,
and I haven't thought about that band in years.
yeah, I mean, honestly, it's funny that you say that because like I'm gonna feel bad if Jake watches this, but I'm sure he understands everybody has different tastes. But like I never really got huge into Sanctus Real. I think it's because I mean I don't really know why. I just never really like gripped onto them. I was like maybe because I was a little too young. I mean I was more into like the CCM stuff once like 10th Avenue North was like the main thing and all that kind of stuff, and then I quickly like went from that into like just straight up Skillet and then like the hardcore and post hardcore and everything.
I need a tattoo that just says straight up Skillet.
Yeah.
Playing around.
Yeah, exactly. So but anyway, so I was talking to him about I'm looking to work with him with some like upcoming tracks and albums and everything, and he talked about how like the talent for like or just the ear for production takes like so many years of working in the industry to be able to like hear what songs need. But he was kind of talking about it in a way that I hadn't thought of, and he was kind of making it sound like arranging and producing are two different things. So I wasn't sure if you could like shed some light on what exactly is production, because I always thought of production as like the texture and like the more of I guess what's really like the arranging sort of thing of what instrument's going to play which parts.
Sure.
But the way he was talking about it, I was like, I do not know what production is whatsoever if it's not that.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, like he said, I think it takes years to learn and to understand, which for me is exciting, right? Because it's like there isn't a light switch of like there isn't a degree or something that you just get and then you just know. It's
Right.
really experience based thing, and it's really an intuitive thing. I think it's really based on like how you understand and see things. And I think like you for years, like when I would record when I was like a teenager and like with bands and whatnot, we go into the studio and like I think production. I would think in terms of like like adding cool little elements or like doing like weird stuff with the drums or like the production side of things was like adding like creative elements and like arranging stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I think what maybe he's trying to get at, and I don't know, but something that I've learned personally is that like production from a technical perspective can be a lot more like sonically listening to the instruments and understanding how do you paint a picture of what this artist or band is trying to say, not just by adding a cool little like arrangement, but like sonically, like, all right, we want the bass to be present, or like how everything balances is like really a creative choice. And like the technicality of stuff is not just about making things sound good, it's making them sound how crafting this, the sonic range about how you want things to sound, like I think it's technical in a creative way, not in a technical way.
Okay.
So I think it has to do with like really like listening and being like, oh, all right, like how do I want to paint this picture of the song, sonically.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds a lot more nuanced based because I've been like taking like an online course from Graham Cochran. You familiar with him?
Mm-hmm.
Dude, yeah, he's great. He's so great. So
I get emails all the time.
Yeah. So I got one of his emails and he was talking about he opened up his like community, his online community. You usually have to pay like $60 for a year, but he opened it up to his email list and made it free for like 90 days. So I like jumped on that ASAP, and I was able to get like one of his like basic first courses called Rethink Mixing for free, which was super dope. And I was like, this is awesome. I get to learn how to mix. But it's funny you mentioned that. It kind of like, I don't know, puts it in proper context, because I'm realizing like engineering is just about making sure that everything like doesn't clash with each other from a frequency perspective. But then and then you have like your static mix sort of thing to make sure that things are able to be heard within the mix and everything. But then you're talking about with production is like even more nuanced of like, well, this might sound like good from like an overall perspective, like from an engineer's perspective, but then you have to make sure that like if it's a heavy metal song sort of thing, you need like bass and drums and guitar sort of thing to be more forward than they would be in like a pop song. So yeah, dude, it's like oh my word, it's overwhelming.
Anyone can just like take it and technically make it sound good, but to have that perspective of like, what does this song need? What does artist need? Like that, I think is like veering into like halfway, like between production and arranging. But yeah, it's interesting and it's fun because I think it's beautiful because there's no right answer. It's like you can like what a song needs is what it needs. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the difficult part too. Is I think like stepping into more of a student role is like you want to know all the right answers, sort of thing, and then it's like, yeah, the experience part is like, yeah, being able to know what the right answer is without having right answers, which is a pretty pretty difficult feat. So
Totally. Yeah, definitely.
cool, man. Well, hey, yeah, thanks for sitting down and talking, man. I appreciate it. I've been just interviewing different people from different perspectives. Kind of mostly, I think so far, either people that are kind of on my level or a couple steps ahead, sort of thing. And I think being able to talk with you, I think is going to be able to kind of increase the reach I've been able to have here on the channel and the podcast for just getting more professional insight, but still from a person that's like still within grasp, sort of thing. I think there's like this. I don't know. I think it's like what we were talking about over text is like just kind of breaking down like, I don't know, kind of the false narrative with like getting signed, sort of thing. And I think as I've learned more about the industry, I've gone, wow, like you could get signed and not be doing anywhere near as well as like an independent band, which I think like you've been able to show that to me too, of like how successful you were with Exiting the Fall and then Valleyheart, and things definitely blew up for you guys with getting signed to am I allowed to say the record label? Or,
Yeah.
Okay. With getting signed to Rise, but it was really interesting seeing like, yeah, you had to put a lot of work in to be able to get to that point in the first place, rather than like, I think my mindset and maybe your mindset when like being a teenager is like, oh, I just like have some talent scout in the back of one of my concerts, and all of a sudden he comes up and we go from playing an open mic to like a European world tour or whatever, So I wanted to have you on just to kind of shed some light into, I think, yeah, just to speak into that like false narrative of like what a record deal from your perspective did do and didn't do for you, and kind of what you noticed were like the pluses and minuses of independent as well as being signed, because I know you spent like what 10-15 years being independent and then stepped into being signed for about like 3 years, and now we're back to being independent again. So I'd love for you to you can kind of share the story of like how that all happened and kind of what your experience was with that.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'll start by saying I think that everyone's story is different, right? I think that everyone has a different experience. So none of what I say is like verbatim of like what everyone will go through or experience. But just personally, this is the experience that I had. But yeah, I think like you, like when you're younger, I was in a band called Exiting the Fall, and we like a big goal of ours, I think like this ambition was to like like get the attention of like industry, like labels or whatever. And I remember it was like a big deal for us, and like and if I'm honest with you, like I think that was one of the things that like ended up like splitting us apart, and along with like life and just people moving away. But I think there was just this like internal pressure of like we either need to like get signed and like do a thing, or like this isn't going anywhere, right? And I think that mentality like wasn't helpful to just the vibe, creativity, or just like anything really. Like looking back on it, I'm like, wow, like we were just really like aiming for the wrong thing. Like I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? But I'm saying that like when that's your single aim, like that can really ruin a lot of like perspective, especially when you're creating and you're like trying to feel good about what you're doing and feel excited and like feel like you're in a room playing with people, then it feels good, like all that. When that goes to the wayside and that's like your single goal, like that's when things start getting a little weird. But I don't know, with Valleyheart, we started the band in I think 2016, and we like had gotten like label offers before we even announced as a band, because I was doing like solo stuff at the time, and like I had put out some music through that, and like had been in conversation with some people, so we had some opportunities. And then but we decided not to really take any chances and go at first with anyone before, because I was like, what, it'd be really cool to just like put our music out there, see what happens, not like take any chances, not like just put our eggs in one basket. So we released an EP in 2016 and did this thing. We played some shows, we did some tours. And then, we got approached by Rise. I think it was 2017 or maybe a little before. I mean, again, at first it was good and there were some good parts of it. But personally, I think for us, I think being a smaller band working with such a big label is a risk, right? And you knew that going in, and I mean, they knew that, right? So it's really tough when you don't have much leverage, you know, and because it's not like, hey, like we're doing this together, which now my view on it is like that if you can do that, I think that might be your best case scenario, you know?
That meaning like doing it together with a label sort of thing, like more of a partnership.
Yeah. Like getting to a point where you've created your fan base, getting to a point where you have, you know, people who care about your music and people who, you know, who just or not even people care about your music, but more you're excited about what you're doing and you have an infrastructure within your group or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you tag team along with someone who helps you enhance those things, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like, oh, here's a small band, we're going to try to break them, which absolutely works for a lot of groups, specifically like pop artists and stuff like that, I think. But for us, I think it was like a case of like, you know, we put out our EP through them again. And it was kind of just like a lot going on at the time for them, I think. And it wasn't like really organized release. And it kind of like, you know, to us, it did well, like beyond my dreams of like how many people have listened to that first EP.
Yeah.
But for them, I think it was like, they were a little just like, oh, like they wanted it to like blow up, you know? And I think it didn't blow up. And the guy we were talking to at the time was kind of, you know, it was just kind of hard to like tap into his brain and be like, hey dude, like we're down to keep trying. You know, I think they just, you know, big labels, I think sometimes they just like sign bands and they just like hope that 1 out of the 5 they choose, like just kind of like makes it. And then it's unfortunate to say, but the ones that don't, they're just kind of like, well, you know, we gave it a shot and it's like a loss for them. But for the band on the other side, it's kind of like, all right, we're like still trying, like we need your support or we need to know what's up. And that's where we kind of like got with that label. It was like, I was like, hey, listen, like if you're not about this anymore, that's totally cool. But like, just let us do our own thing. And that's fine. So that's, you know, and then we agreed with that. And then that's kind of where we're at now. So yeah, it wasn't the worst experience, but it wasn't something that I would say was like fruitful, not even just for us, but for them really. Like it wasn't a relationship that like was like super like fruitful and like, you know, like beneficial, I would say, for both. But I don't know. I'm not going to say like, oh yeah, like signing to label is like not a good thing. It's bad, or like being independent, it's like bad or the way to go. It's like, I think it really is case by case. And I think that depending on your genre, depending on how you work, depending on your story, like it can completely be different in every way. You know, I think there are some bands out there that like do everything themselves, like down to the music videos and the recording and even the mastering, like everything, marketing, like, and they're killing it. They're doing everything they want to do. And that's amazing. There are other people who are more limited where they could use that support, you know? So I think it's important to not like put your mind into one, like, oh, this is the right way or the wrong way, but kind of just understand who you are and like where you're at and if it's a good idea. So now like we're just doing our thing and we have been talking to some labels, but again, I'm like being really cautious and want to make sure that anything we do is like really like a partnership and like not just like us trying to like tag along to some big label to like try to blow us up, because like that's not the way to think, I think, is what I've realized, you know?
Yeah. And so like, what's the main reason for like caution for you with like talking to other labels? I know you've kind of talked about, you know, I don't know, maybe the mindset sort of thing and just trying to be careful, but is there like a specific fear of like trying not to like give too much of like, I don't know, I guess like royalty rights away, or like, well, what's the main like caution for you as far as with wanting to partner with the label?
I think that labels these days are losing a lot of the roles that they used to play, in terms of like getting music out there, in terms of like being those mediators that they still are. But I think that as time goes on, it's getting a bit easier with Spotify and streaming services and just social media to do that for yourself. But with that said, I think that labels, they still serve a purpose in terms of marketing, right? So I think when you go like on a label site and you see like I listen to X band and like, oh, I want to listen to more bands that sound like this kind of band, like where like, oh, like you kind of get into this like groove or mind about like a certain style and you kind of get into this culture. I think labels still act as a really good place to like kind of centralize culture and like genre and like, you know, kind of just like finding new artists and like kind of the like marketing PR sense, like the word of mouth thing, even like, oh, let me see who's on this label's website, you know? So I think for me, as weird as it sounds, like I want to make sure that we're with someone that like it makes sense for us. Cause with Rise, it was like, we were like, okay, even when we were like thinking about doing it, we're like, okay, we're really different than like a lot of, bands on this label. We were like, you know what, whatever, we'll take a chance to see what happens. We might be the different ones, but it might work. But I don't know, it seemed out of place. Like it was just a weird thing. But I think for me, something that's important is to be with people who kind of get what we're trying to go for musically, and where we kind of fit, not perfectly, but we fit into some sort of like, thing that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And so like what was you guys I mean, I wanted to touch on what you talked about with the marketing difference. I mean, I think for me, I've realized like just like my short stint of like just trying to get plugged in with like a local scene here in Michigan and everything, and even with like digital releases and all that kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, it can be pretty overwhelming in the beginning of like, how in the world do you like make your one little single stick out from like, I think Spotify gets like 20,000 submissions a day or something like that for new songs. You know what I'm saying? So, I think with talking to a lot of people, like they've mentioned how marketing is kind of king nowadays, because, that's kind of the main thing, which I'm sure it's always been the main thing, but it's as like media, whether it be social media, news coverage, local channels, internet websites, all that kind of stuff, as it grows more and more and more, especially the internet, like you need to have experience and insight and resources to be able to like make your head stick out above the rest, sort of thing. And then as you make your head stick out above the rest, obviously that I think that like acceleration starts to accelerate in and of itself, sort of thing. That little bit of momentum you get can kind of snowball. But so what was your main like insight? I think, because for me, I would think, oh, boom, I get on a record label, I've got a great marketing team, which I think is true, at least like going from where I'm at, sort of thing, to the marketing team that is a standard thing with many record labels. So what's been your experience with that? Was there a big marketing difference, sort of thing, if you guys online traction and everything, or not so much?
I mean, I'll be honest, there was some,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it was just through kind of normal association with people who followed that label. They were like people who were on their site. But I'll be honest with you, like, I think we did like one PR thing for like everyone I've ever loved, like one like shootout email, and that was it. Like everything else marketing wise, like the imaging, the posts, everything was just me, like, and stuff with us. Like,
Wow.
none of it was like a team. It was just all like me sitting down, which honestly is encouraging for me, because I was like, okay, cool. Like I could do this. Like,
Yeah.
like you just, and I think it's not just me, but like there are just tons of bands that I look up to, like, that are killing it right now, that they just get, it's just about honing in on that vision. Like, what do you want to say? Like, what do you want to like show in yourself, in your song or whatever? And if you really are sure of that, like you can find a way to represent that well. It's hard. It's a lot of work, but I think for me, like the experience of being on a label, I showed that like, okay, I can't rely on this, because they're literally not helping me with this. So I'm going to just learn how to do it on my own. And I mean, I definitely could use some help, and I'm open to help, but for where we're at now, where we've gotten, a lot of that stuff was just like creating, I don't know, just promotional stuff, and just trying to just get our music out there, and trusting that, I don't know, trusting the songs would just speak for themselves, which is really hard to say with so much noise and saturation these days. Like, but I still think, I'm still a believer that that's the biggest thing. I think that I'm just a believer that like that you put out something into the world, and if it's amazing, it will find its way to the ears that it will need to be found at. Like I know it's kind of a romantic view, but that's the only thing that keeps me sane, because if I don't think like that, I just get way too stressed about like marketing and releasing and like stuff like that, and it completely just distorts like how I think of everything creatively. And I just got kind of just gotta like trust that like what you're doing is something that needs to be said, and something that's true and real, and just kind of hope for like every release just feels like a hope for the best. I mean, from where I'm at still at this point, but it's exciting, it's fun, and still got a long way to go. So
no, I think that's really wise. I think that's I mean, that even inspires like peace within my own heart, sort of thing, of like, I think especially getting started out, where I think because like the internet has grown so much, all the numbers are like so huge, to where I was thinking about this, even just like some YouTube videos I've uploaded, and like getting my first like couple of subscribers and everything. It's like, 10 years ago, I've probably been like, oh man, this is cool. Like, I don't know, one of my songs have like 1,000 listens. And it's like 10 years ago, that'd have been like, oh my word, my song got listened to 1,000 times,
I know.
But now it's like, well, it's not 10,000. Like it's not 10,000. It's not 100,000. That's where the real big league starts, sort of thing, or not even. It's like that's where the legitimate minor leagues start in my head.
Well, that's the tough thing, though. It's like gauging like that thing of success is so hard because, all right, let's say your song hits 1 million views or something, like then you got like Billie Eilish with like 100 billion like, you know what I mean? Like there's no scale really. Like who are you scaling yourself by? Like it's like you said, it's grown to a size that like, so that's why I try, right? And I fail all the time, but I try to like not think too much about that stuff because it's completely disproportional and it's completely a wild place in your mind to like try to just scale yourself in some way. Because if you're just someone who wants to start out and you have something amazing, like you should just do it. Like you shouldn't think about that. I know in an ideal world, right? But that's how I try to think.
Right. Yeah. No, but I think that mindset of what you're saying of trusting that, I think I would add one thing. You were saying trusting that when I release this thing, it'll end up in the ears it needs to end up in. I think I would add the metric of time into that. I think that's the thing I need to focus on the most. Is like,
definitely.
Like just starting off, I was like, oh man, why is this like, it's taking forever, And it's like, you work for like 2 years and I just started to like infiltrate my own local music scene of like starting to open up for local bands and everything. And that took like 2 years of just like living in a place and getting to know people just to barely get a toe in the door sort of thing, And it's like, but it's like realizing that it's like, okay, but over time, like once again, like the thing I was talking about before, of like you get your head to stick out above the masses just a tiny little bit, and that little bit starts to grow exponentially, sort of thing. Go ahead.
No, I think that's so good. It's so true, and I think giving it time is really hard because I think we live in a culture now that's like it feels like, especially in the entertainment industry, it just feels like you got one shot,
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, like, what's the first week sales or all that stuff,
Yeah,
I get it. There's a whole industry to that, but I think like in terms of like putting your music out there, like it's about trust. You just gotta like trust that it will. Again, if you believe in it, like you gotta trust it'll do its thing and that it'll, and you gotta do your part. But you can't try to just like hold on to that thing. It's like, but yeah, infiltrating music scene is definitely another thing, right? Like just being a part of it, right? Like to it's like any community. It takes time, it takes relationships. It takes trust. It takes like you doing stuff, it takes you playing shows and familiar faces. Like I know that person, like, like I've seen them. Oh, who are, it's like, it just, that's how we are as people, but that's not how the internet is, right? It's like, you have a minute to decide or judge something for how it is.
Yeah.
But like in real life, like that's not how stuff works,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So actually I wanted to, there's like a couple questions that I have kind of all centered around kind of the same things. So we're talking about internet, we're talking about music scene. And so kind of the next like category I wanted to head on to is like the difference you saw between like touring as an independent band versus touring as a signed band, and maybe getting to, once again, maybe address false dialogues as well as giving some insight into things people don't even think about. I'm saying things you don't even like kind of realize until you start touring with people that have been doing it for a long time and kind of the difference between that. So what was your experience with like the touring independently versus signed?
Absolutely none.
Was it really?
It was the same exact thing. But again, that's because like there wasn't much of a team built, right? Like everything that I had been doing like before getting signed, it was just an extension of that, right? So there wasn't this just like big moment of like, like getting huge like writers and playing big venues, and that does happen for some people. But I really can't speak to that because the tours that we did even after getting signed, they were more like independent tours. Like one of the tours, like I booked half of it, and like another guy, Mitchell, who plays in a band called Mountains Like Wax, we both booked that tour. So yeah, it's tough because I can't personally speak to that, but I do know it happens. We did a tour with My Epic last year, but that had nothing to do with the label, but that was cool. But again, it felt very much like things we had been doing for years, like playing, like kind of 100, 150, 200 cap rooms, it was fun. It was a blast. It was such a great experience, but it wasn't like a light switch of like everything's changed now. You know, it's
Yeah.
like kind of just keep doing your thing, and like yeah, that's kind of how it was for us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, so I guess it leads me to my next question, which is I know obviously from I listened to you guys interview with Night Drive's podcast years ago. You were when you were down in Lynchburg, Virginia. It was like your first Valleyheart tour.
Yeah, with Blake.
Yeah. So I remember listening to that a couple times, and I was like, man, this is some really cool insight stuff. But I remember you guys
Love that
talking.
first tour, man.
Yeah. I remember that because I remember oh man, when you guys released Nowadays, I think it was like the day before I think it was when your guys' album release show was the day of my birthday, and I was
Oh,
actually in Israel on a school trip, so I was like streaming Nowadays. Was that
March 16th? No, when's
no?
your?
March 18th. So I think you guys.
Okay, maybe
Yeah.
maybe I'm, or it's either the 17th or the 18th. Probably the 18th. Yeah.
I think it might have been the 17th. I'm not sure, but I remember streaming you guys' album because I've been like waiting for it, and I was like listening to it in this like youth hostel we were like staying in as like a cheap hotel or something like that over in Israel. But I remember you talking to Blake and talking about how a lot of the connections and like infrastructure you had set up in Exiting the Fall by like kind of touring nationally with that, really kind of fed into having some sort of basis to go off with Valleyheart. Obviously, you kind of did a genre change to where, I think you guys lost a lot of context with that. But I kind of wanted to say all that to frame this next question, which is obviously with the internet thing, we were talking about how internet can be an advantage because you're able to reach way more people than you could ever reach physically, sort of thing, with a lot less money going behind it. But there's also this disadvantage of there's like this tapping into like the worst part of human nature, which is like you're judging things by its cover. And it's like, if it doesn't interest me in like 3 seconds or less, then I'm going to click on the next thing, whereas with an actual in-person show or a relationship or whatever, you're able to talk to that person, you put a face to the music, and all of a sudden, you can have a lot more grip on somebody's heart as an artist or a band by having a face-to-face interaction than some ad on Facebook. So, thinking about Exiting the Fall's structure and everything across the country and how you guys kind of tapped into that with Valleyheart. For the age we're in right now, which is very internet driven, do you think a band should try to, I don't know, I guess like infiltrate different markets by internet traffic, or infiltrate different markets by trying to, even though it costs like a ton of money, trying to play as many shows in the local market, and then trying to play as many shows in the new markets you're trying to get into, even if you don't have much of a following there? So like, what's the best way to build up a following? Internet, or trying to play shows in these different places, even though it costs a ton of money?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I think like the label stuff, like we talked about, and everything else, I think there isn't a right answer. I think it really depends on the type of band that you're in or artist that you are. It depends on what kind of place in life that you're at, and I think it depends on the genre too. I think that, if you're in your like late 20s and you have a band with people with married and kids, it's going to be hard to tour all the time and play shows off the bat, especially if you're starting out like where you're not making like money like playing, you're just kind of like doing it because you love it. I think that's harder, and I think that that's what causes a lot of bands to quit. So I think in that way the internet's good, where it's like you don't have to be touring all the time to be a productive musician, right? Like you're releasing music, you're releasing content, and you could still feel like you're a part of some community, right? So I try to think of it with like positives on both ends, because it's really easy for me to be like a big cynic about the internet and like, oh man, this all sucks. Like we're completely losing our sense of like how everything is. And I find myself in that headspace a lot, but then I always have to bring myself back down, because I'm like, this is the reality of where we're in, and there is good in it, and you have to bring out that good and not just like discard the whole thing altogether. Because I mean, you can if you're like Sufjan Stevens and you're barely on, you just like do your thing, like, but it's like, again, that's why I think it depends on the type of artist. Where like some markets and some genres, I think, expect online presence, and they expect like a really strong online presence. I think there are other genres and kind of other circles that like it's not as important, or it's like it's viewed in a different way. It's like almost if you have too much of an online presence, it's like not cool. Like it's like dude, relax, you know?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
really think it's about figuring out that balance of like you don't want to be that over the top like too much content, like it just feels forced. Like I think people are catching on to that, and I have a theory that it's gonna revert back to a lot of like in a new way, like a lot of different things. I don't know. I think like everything in life, like history repeats itself, right? Like I think in the '80s there was just like a huge like production, and like there wasn't the internet, but there was like music in the '80s was awesome, but it was very like appearance based, right? Like it was glamorous, it was big, it was music videos, it was MTV, it was like this
Right.
crazy stuff, right?
The 90s bounced right back against that with grunge rock.
And then the '90s, it was
Right.
like completely. I think people collectively like they just felt this like, man, we want that, we want natural again, we want something different, but
Yeah.
familiar. Like so, obviously, it's not going to happen in the same way. But I think at some point there's going to be this like resurgence of like I don't know that. Well, now with COVID stuff, I don't know if it's going to be like in person stuff, but there's going to be this like a change, right, in how we perceive things. And so I think yeah, it's a kind of month to month, day to day changing thing. And now with the state of the world now, I mean that introduces a new element and layer to it altogether,
Yeah.
But I think it depends. I think it depends on the artist. I think it depends on their ability to tour. I think it depends on their fan base as well. And if it's something that like if you're in a crazy big pop band and you are posting one thing a year and like not really doing anything, it's like if you're in a pop band or like something like mainstream, like your online presence will probably be like pertinent.
Yeah.
I think it's case by case.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so with that, I remember, I mean, talking to somebody years back, sort of thing, and it can be a really big temptation for I think all bands and artists, myself included, to try to like, I don't know. It's funny that the dynamic with touring, which is like, touring is supposed to, when you think about it from a business perspective, it's supposed to serve a purpose, which is like gaining new like warm leads for your business, which is helping to make new fans that'll back in the day buy your music, now stream your music and come out to more shows, sell more tickets, all that kind of stuff. But it's funny because that like business method has been so like for all of us musicians so like idolized, sort of thing, of like, oh man, touring is so cool, which I'm sure it is. Just from a small taste of it that I've gotten, it's like, yeah, it's a lot of fun being able to like show up in a new place and it's like 10 hours away from the last place you were at, and you're like in this new room with new people, and you get to play this stuff. It is really cool, but it's funny thinking about it from like a business and marketing perspective. Okay, this is supposed to be a tool that I use to grow a fan base, sort of thing. And yet I think oftentimes the cart gets put before the horse, especially for me. I know in my own life, I'm like, dude, I just got to get on the road as soon as possible, and it's like, and like, meanwhile, you don't even have like the infrastructure set up to really be able to handle that well, to be able to be able to, enjoy the dream, but have the dream actually be able to grow your platform and grow your business, rather than just playing for some band in Texas because you can, and because you can. And meanwhile, they're not going to be any warm leads there. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think the steps for a band and obviously it'll depend on each band, like we're talking about. I think with like everything we've talked about today, kind of depends artist to artist. But in your experience and kind of with the bands you've worked with, what are the things you think are really necessary to have in place before you try to jump out on the road, sort of thing, and be able to do that successfully?
It's a great question. Yeah, and I think that struggle is real for a lot of like smaller to mid-sized bands. I think you're at a point where you have people who are like, hey, come play in my town in Texas or Arkansas or like Michigan or whatever, and like you're like, oh, like people would come to see us, but it's hard to justify it because it's such a financial burden. And I think when you're younger, it's a little easier to justify, personally, I guess. But the older you get, I still think it's important. I still think that grassroots kind of mentality is really, really important and is real. And like, think about bands I've seen live who like I get into, and those are some of my favorite bands because I have that experience. I have instead live listening to like a song, like it's like I remember that first contact, that first time, and I think that's still super, super important. But I think it it gets harder because it's hard to justify it financially when you're not like, making like good pocket money every night or something,
Right. Yeah.
I think finding a balance of like things that make sense, right? So if you're like a mid to smaller size band, finding opportunities to, I think, first of all, this is how we've done it, and I think this is a good method, but like maybe doing one tour that you do understand that you're gonna probably make that sacrifice of like maybe losing money or maybe just breaking even, of like just doing it out, like going out there, playing who you can, playing for where you can. But I think it's important to never do the same thing twice. I think if you're constantly doing the same kinds of opportunities and tours, especially when it comes to touring, I think there should be a red flag there. And I think if you're constantly doing those things over and over and without growing, it's showing that like you're kind of in that same rut, and you're kind of financially losing money, but you're also not really growing that experience. So I think it's an important balance of like taking that chance, doing that thing, understanding you're gonna like maybe break even, maybe not make that much money, but doing a few like that. But then getting to a point where like, okay, we can't just keep doing this if it's not growing, right? If it starts growing, you have to kind of be a bit more selective, I think, about your opportunities. And like, if you get a tour with like a tour offer from someone that's like the same spots that you just went to, and it's like with a band that's maybe your size or smaller, maybe it's not the best idea. Maybe it's like stay home and write your next record and like be productive, like don't just tour to tour, But if it's an opportunity that's like a slight bit more of a risk, but it's like a band that's like a bit bigger and like you be gaining more fans, new fans. Yeah, I think the risks are worth taking, but I think they have to be calculated risks, and I think they have to be really thought through, and not just be like, oh, like, yeah, tour, like any opportunity, like let's jump on it,
Right.
I know that's hard because when you're starting out and you're just touring, again, when you're younger, it's even possible, but I think it's hard because touring is fun and it is great, and it does feel like a vacation with your friends and your music every night. I think from like a business perspective, it's not financially smart or lucrative to just like accept every opportunity that comes your way.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, here, so for touring, what was your favorite memory with Exiting the Fall, and then what's your favorite memory with Valleyheart?
Oof.
Well, actually, I'll make a little more difficult because now you can pull from 3 different pockets. What was your favorite Kevin Williams tour as well?
Oh, yeah. So yeah, I've done 3. Yeah. Oh man. Okay. That's a hard question. Exiting the Fall. I remember. Okay, this might not be my favorite memory because there are so many, because we did like 7 or 8 tours.
Dang.
Yeah, it was a lot. There's so many good memories, man. But just the first one that's coming to mind. I remember there was at one point, maybe it was like 2012 or something, where we were driving through, I think it was like the Smokies, like in Chattanooga, or like outside of Chattanooga. And I remember just driving, and it was just like the most beautiful day outside, and it was like all the windows were down, and I just remember like looking outside, and like the sun was just peering in like perfectly, and we stopped and like went on this like a national park and like swam in the river and just like explored these mountains, and it was just, yeah, it was one of my favorite memories. And we ended up doing that like a couple times whenever we went through that part of the country. And I still have like a special place for the Smoky Mountains. But yeah, that's just one memory I have. But then there's millions others. There's just like meeting people, like all kinds of different peoples in different parts of the states, which some I still keep in contact with and are still friends with some, and definitely super thankful for those experiences. Yeah. Kevin Williams stuff. John, who plays in Valleyheart and Exiting the Fall, he and I went on a tour, I think in 2016. And one of my favorite memories for that is we played a house show in Chattanooga, actually, another Chattanooga memory. Wow. And I remember this house show, we showed up, and my friend James Turner, who plays in a band called Formative Years, who's awesome, just check them out. He booked this house show, and I remember just showing up, not knowing what to expect. This tour was the most DIY tour I've ever done. I booked everything through just friends I had made throughout the years. And I remember showing up this house show, and I remember walking into this room, and there was like 100 like kids there, and it was just like insanity. And it was like such a like not what I expected, and it was so cool. Met so many awesome people that night, and just had a great time, and it was super chill. And that was probably my favorite memory from that tour.
That's awesome. That's a big house. Either that or like you literally had people with like no breathing room.
Yeah, right.
Oh my
Yeah,
word, dude. Dang.
yeah, which would never, now it wouldn't.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the
Looking
feds
back
show
on it,
up
it's
now
like,
if you
oh,
did that.
so nice people.
Yeah.
For Valleyheart, I mean, there's a couple good ones, but I'm just thinking maybe most recently was the My Epic tour. I had the opportunity to sing backup vocal, well, like a kind of a backup vocal part on one of their on My Epic songs, a song called Lower Still. There's like a second verse where there's like a guest vocal singer, and I remember like 5 years ago, like that was my favorite My Epic song, and I remember just like
Wow.
being in my car and just like singing my heart out to that song like so many times, and to be able to like like I remember one show we were in Atlanta, Georgia, and like Matt Goldman, who produced like Copeland and City's Burn, he was like there, and like there was a crazy cool show in Atlanta, and I remember just being on stage like singing that part with them. I was doing it every night, but that night specifically, it just like hit me. I was like, dude, this is
Wow.
crazy, and like I'm just so thankful for this opportunity, because I would have never dreamed to like be up there singing like such a cool song that I loved so much, and the opportunity to like sing it with the guys who wrote it like every night was really, really cool.
Wow, dude. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was fun.
Dang, man. Imagine so how old were you when you were like singing that song in your car?
Oh, maybe like that was probably like 2011, 2012. 2012, yeah, like I was senior in high school. Yeah.
Imagine if 18-year-old you flashed straight forward from that moment to being on stage.
Definitely, man. That's what I mean. Like that's so great. It was just mind blowing. I remember when Aaron from My Epic asked me, I was like, playing it so cool. I was like, yeah, man, sure. Like, yeah, no, that's yeah, I can do that. I gotta like take a look at the lyrics. Like in my mind, I already know all the lyrics, like know all the harmonies. Like,
oh my gosh. You want me to sing second harmony or third harmony?
yeah. They trying to play it so cool, but like inside, I was like screaming.
Oh my word, dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, here, so I'll close up our discussion with a couple last questions. Mainly just insight for bands and artists in a couple areas we've talked about. So what's been, I know this is probably, I'm asking a lot of hard questions, but what's been I don't know, I guess the biggest thing biggest intuition you've gained about the recording process of just being able to get more of that initial like emotional texture and the initial inspiration you have, and getting that to be able to be well represented in the final recording? What's been like the biggest thing you've learned in that process throughout like the past 10 years of recording?
Oh, it's such a good question. I love that question. I think recording is my favorite part about being a musician. I think like I like touring, I like playing live, I like practicing, like, but I think my favorite part is just being in the studio and like hearing a song come alive, there's just nothing like hearing what's in your head and that you made with people or alone, and just like hearing that become tangible. I think there's a couple things, but I think a big thing is to like just follow your ideas, follow your brain. I think it's really tempting when you get into the recording space, especially for me now and like people who are growing up and learning more about audio and learning more about technicality and the engineering side. I think it's really good, but I think it's really tempting to kind of start viewing everything like mechanically and viewing it technically. And I think that really inhibits your ability to or prohibits your ability to just really kind of take your mind where it's going and like try weird things out and like try different things out. I think it's just really important to just really have a vision, but also just try things out and see how it makes you feel, see how it works. I think it's like making something on the spot. Like you have to be interactive with what you're making. I think working with someone like a producer is like really important.
Yeah.
I think there's a big shift towards like making stuff on your own, doing stuff on your own, which is cool, which I do for my solo stuff. But I think there's something really cool about finding someone who understands your vision, but also can extend what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times, a lot of stuff, just the solutions right in front of us, but like it was just so in our head and we just listened to it so many times that we can't see past it. So to have someone else from a different perspective who gets what you're trying to do, to be like, hey, let's try this, or like, what if we tried this differently, or like, let's do this, or I think this needs more of this, or that needs less of this. I think that really, really balances out your kind of your mentality on the whole project and the whole song. And that's what I loved about working with Kevin Billingsley for our last album, Everyone I've Ever Loved. him and I had such a cool time making that album together, and he really felt like a part of that project. Like he was in the band for those 2 weeks while we tracked that. But again, it's a balance because he didn't like overstep and like, become too attached and like try to change anything. He was really, really open, but also really, and I did a lot of stuff in my house at that time too, like a lot of synth stuff and guitar stuff. And I'd send it to him. And instead of him being like, oh, we got to re-record this sounds bad. Like, because at the time I think I was like still figuring out how to like record a lot of stuff, and some of it didn't technically sound good. But what I loved about Kev, and he took that and he was like, this has a vibe. Let's, I'll figure it out in the mix, but like, I love it. Like, so to really like find that balance of like engineering and just like emotion and like raw, just whatever that might be. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and still trying to find that balance,
Yeah, wow, that's really great. Yeah, and it's cool to hear that too, because I can imagine like what you described about Kevin. I'm sure it just takes time, maturity to be able to like know the rules of the book, sort of thing, of what frequencies are supposed to work and not supposed to work, sort of thing, and then being able to just like, I don't know, that's a really special talent to be able to have the maturity to be able to hold on to both things well at the same time, of like being able to create music and being a mathematician at the same time, of knowing what
yeah, of course. But I think it's important balance, because you want to work with someone who's just like gets what you're trying to do. And if you want to get weird and like have a crazy sound or something, and like not to shut that down, 'cause if you shut that down, it's like almost like when you're in the studio, you're like a kid and you just want to play, and like, and like when you have someone to tell you stop, it's like your parents when you're a kid saying you get off that bed. Like,
right,
you want that in the studio. You want just like, you want to feel the ability to just like do anything and everything, and you want to feel limitless and you want to feel free. And I think that's when the best art is made. And so I think finding a producer who lets you do that while still being able to rein you in a little bit without kind of like crossing that line is really important.
It almost sounds like, it sounds like to me like it's important to have a good friendship and good relationship with that producer too. Because it's like you have to trust them and not be able to and be able to not take everything they're saying as personally, which is a pretty hard thing to get over.
I remember doing vocal takes. I remember there was like a good 2 days where like we had tracked most stuff and like we were just doing vocals and everyone had left, and it was like the middle of February. We were tracking, and Kevin and I were just like doing hours of vocals, and we got into such a good groove of like we were in the same wavelength to the T, where like we would do a take and we would at the same time be like yes or no, and like 90% of the time it'd be like yep, and then we'd move on, or like nope, and like we knew exactly what sound we were going for, and it was like we were completely in sync of like, okay, that's the vibe we want, that's not the vibe here, we would just move real quickly, and that was a really cool syncopation to kind of fall into.
Yeah, but honestly, I was thinking as you were explaining that, I think that also just comes from, you've been working in the studio now for like what, 10 over 10 years now, as far as like the first time you recorded with, so I think that's something too with just being able to build up, I don't know, I guess security in your ability as a musician and and all that kind of stuff, to be able to kind of go through some of those, false wounds enough in the beginning of like, that hurt my feelings, you didn't like my bass part, to being able to just be able to take it. And I think also being able to know how to, I think one of the main securities for me is realizing that like recording vocals is like it's an instrument in and of itself. Like you can be a good singer in your bedroom. That doesn't mean you're gonna be a good singer up on stage. You kind of have to like relearn how to sing on the stage, sort of thing, to be able to just to be able to project properly and be able to control your voice with the microphone, because you're adding this different layer. But then I noticed like there's this third instrument of recording vocals is like very, very different, because you're hearing your voice like with no reverb, no natural like warmness from the room. You're hearing exactly the way it is, like right in your eardrums, which is a very, very like scary place to sing from, which is
different. But you're right, it does take years of kind of being okay with that. But even still, like there are times where like I do a lot of recording here at my house now, but even like here I'm recording, there's just some days I'm like, man, like, oh, this is tough. Like I can't get this one thing to sound like how I hear it. And
right,
so much different when you're in a room where like, people are talking, and it's you're so right, man. It's such a different beast, and both have their challenges, and but they're different for sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right, last two things is what's the main insight you've learned, I think, just in the process of like we won't say touring, just like booking in the first place sort of thing. Well, what's been like the major insight or like helpful thing you've learned with like whether it be etiquette or just like how to be able to approach people or like what shows to book, any one of those things? What's the main thing that sticks out in your head from like when you first started booking shows 15 years ago to right now? What's the biggest thing you've learned?
Um, I learned, well, etiquette. You mean you learn, right? You learn like things on the road, especially when you're touring with other bands. You know, like break down your equipment quick. Don't like, it's one of the tough things is like when you're an opener and you're playing at a small venue, right? And then like you finish, and then like someone's like trying to talk to you, and like you're trying to like be nice and not be a jerk, but also like you got to understand that like I have to break this stuff down because another band's playing. So
Right.
I guess okay. So I think for me, I get really worn out on tour. Like I love touring, but I get really, really, really exhausted. Not even, I mean, physically because of the traveling and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But for me, like the social stuff is like overwhelming. I think for me, I'm more of an introvert, I believe, but also just like those situations where like people are trying to talk to you and like, which is amazing, which is so cool. But like when you have to like go do something else or you have to break down stuff and you kind of feel like a jerk for not giving as much attention as you can, right? Because in any other normal situation, if someone comes up try to talk to you, I'm not going to be like, hey dude, like I'd love to, but like I'm going to go do something else. No, I would at least engage with them. But I think finding that balance on tour where it's like finding kindness with yourself. I think for a lot of times I would like beat myself up and be like, wow, like I was not there tonight, or I wasn't like in that conversation. I was just like, because you're tired, right? You drove all day, like you just play, you sweating on stage, and someone's main event for that day was to come see you play your band, and their attention is completely on that one moment. So I just found like a lot of conversations I've had, my mind is just like I'm talking to someone and I'm thinking it's 12:30. If we leave now, we're gonna get to our next place at 4 a.m. Maybe that's before the sun comes up, and like they're like spilling their heart out, and I just felt really guilty about that for a long time, and still do sometimes. But I think it's just navigating, like, you just got to like be forgiving to yourself. And like now I understand like other bands on tour, like I'm so much more forgiving because it's hard, man. It's like takes a lot out of you, and it's physically exhausting and mentally exhausting. So I think just kind of having like the understanding that like you're not all there when you're on tour. You are, but like it's your head's in a million places. And to kind of, to try to like be okay with that mentality, because when I'm home, I'm very intentional about everything I'm doing. But when you're on the road, it's like your mind is just in a million places. So to kind of be okay with that is probably the biggest thing I've learned. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Yeah, 'cause I think the artistic side of things usually ends up lining up with a lot of introverts. So it's like I think a lot of people who are wanting to be able to spill their guts out, it's like they're usually that way because they're very introverted and very like mulling over their own emotions, sort of thing. So I think that'll probably relate to a lot of people. Well, here last one is still kind of on the whole like booking thing. Is what would you say? I'm sure you've seen an evolution of how you've spoken to, promoters or booking agents, whatever, over the years. And I remember, for me, I remember sending like a bunch of cold emails of people that I didn't know at all, and it's like, hey, I don't like have a following really, but like, can I open for this band sometime? And of course, they never get back to me because it's like I did not do any of the things I was supposed to be doing there. So. And I think that's an evolution that usually everybody goes through. So what's been the top thing you'd say, do this and don't do this when you're reaching out to venues or promoters or booking agencies, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I don't know, man. It's hard doing the cold call, cold email thing. I did it for years, and it's really hard because you send out a million and you get back like, a few. And I think just being really intentional about how your email, right, and how you like what you want to say, and also understanding that like it's a tough position for a promoter to like take a chance on something like that, and not getting like offended or like cynical or like burnt out because like you're not getting your emails responded to. Like it makes sense, and I think not taking it personally is a really big thing. I don't know, man. I think my advice to that is just like it's kind of like the other touring thing we were talking about. It's like you, if you're trying that hard to tour, that's cool, maybe a couple times. But if you're like continuously messaging like the same people, trying to get back and do the same thing,
Yeah.
maybe like stay home and write an album and write a good album and then release it, and then maybe someone will reach out to you and try to book you. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's like the easy solution to everything, but I'm saying that I think for people stuck in that rut, which I've been there before, I think it's important to like be like, appreciate where you're at and appreciate what the resources you have and the abilities you have. And if you have the ability to be home, don't just always think the grass is greener, like on the road, where like you can be doing something that can up your chances of being someone who would have a good show in the future, right?
Right. Yeah.
Easier said than done. But I think it's just more of like a mentality shift of like, if you're knocking on the same door over and over and it's just like not working out, like try something new and like see if you'll come back to that opportunity and it'll present itself in a new way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really great. Yeah, I think that loops back in pretty well with what we were talking about earlier with not doing the same thing twice. Well, Kevin, hey, thanks so much for coming on, man. I appreciate your time and your insight, man.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, man, go ahead.
All right, cool. So what's up in Michigan? Like, are you mentioned music stuff's going on? Like, what's your world looking like these days?
Yeah, so because I think honestly, I think the last time I saw you was at you guys were playing at what's that sushi place in Salem? Was it?
Yeah, Kodo.
Yeah. I remember I went there.
No, or Opus. Was it Opus or Kodo?
No, it's Kodo. It's Kodo.
Oh, it's Kodo. Okay, because Kodo is like the grungy brother, and Opus is like the like nice preppy boy of sushi places. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to that, and it's I was at my my first year of Bible college at Word of Life Bible Institute up in upstate New York, and I remember coming back home on break, and I went with Zach Chekowitz. He was yeah. So he and I went with his girlfriend Sarah and our friend Connor, and I remember it was like so different coming from like Bible college in Adirondack, New York, to like back to like. Yeah. Pretty much like the strongest taste of Massachusetts you could get, which is like a sushi bar with a heavy metal venue built into it. And I was like, this is an interesting pair, man. Like that's I'm snacking on crab rangoons while listening to some death metal sort of thing. You know?
Yeah. Who else played that show? Was it a hardcore show?
Yeah, it was back. I think it was still when you guys were like capitalizing on the hardcore like connection sort of thing. So I forget the
yeah, I think Conveyor played.
Yes. Yeah, Conveyor, yeah.
I remember that show, yeah.
Yeah, man, that was legit. And I think that might have been the first time I'd seen you guys, because I'd seen you guys, oh man, I'm trying to think. I think actually that was in 2017 when I graduated. I'm forgetting now, but I remember because that
was 2016, man. That was our fourth show. I remember very clearly. That was in like May of 2016. Yeah,
that would make sense. Yeah,
June of 2016. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think I might have seen you guys back there again in 2017 then.
Okay. Yeah, we played there a couple times.
Yeah, because then I remember, I think that's when you guys had just started using lights and all that kind of stuff. And I remember I was like, I was freaking out. I was like, this is so legit.
Yeah, I remember that. We played there again. Actually, that was the first show that our now bassist, Chris, played with us.
Okay.
He was also roommate, maybe listening. So.
Okay. Anyway, so I graduated from there and I moved back to Mass for like, I don't know, probably like 6 or 7 months or something like that. And then my wife and I got married, and she's from Michigan. So she and I met at Bible college and got engaged, and then I came back home, worked for a little bit. And then as we were just trying to figure out stuff to do, we just decided on Michigan sort of thing. So just to kind of start off our life out here. So yeah, man. So she's from Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is where we're living right now. It's like, Grand Rapids.
Yeah, you're in West.
We're like almost like directly south of Grand Rapids. I mean, like maybe it's like a tiny little bit west, because it's like it's west of Detroit, south of Grand Rapids. So, anyways, yeah. So we moved out here, and I'm trying to think, man. I've just been kind of like working a bunch of jobs, like just doing factory stuff and everything. And yeah, I kind of like went to like a stripping season in the end of like the end of my second year at Bible college, or kind of like just giving up on the whole music thing and going like, I don't know if this is really what I want to do. In the beginning of the year, actually, and then kind of went through this really like dry, like not writing anything for like 6 months, and then was like, Lord, I seriously miss doing this. Like, I know it was like a huge idol, but like I miss just being able to like, I don't know, just like process things by writing, and I hadn't been able to do that in like 6 or 8 months. So kind of started like building back up again, and just wanted to like share my story and just like share music and everything. And so started doing music stuff, and I moved out here, and I was like full of vigor and like, oh, I need to get connected to the music scene like right now. You know, I don't have any songs out at all on anything, but I need to like play shows right now, sort of thing. And yeah, it's been kind of like a learning process over the past 2 years of just like, I don't know, I think learning to be patient, like you were talking about, learning how to like just enjoy the stage that you're at and not be so discontent and like anxious about like, well, I'm not here yet, therefore it's like not good enough, sort of thing, you know. And of course it's easier to say now that like I think I've kind of worked through a lot of that like anxious itchiness sort of thing, and now that I've like gotten plugged in with a couple bands that like I was looking up to for a while, sort of thing, and it's been cool. But yeah, man, so I'm just I'm with my wife, and we got 2 kids now. We got yeah, was that?
Congratulations. I said that's insane. Congratulations, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, so my son is 15 months old, and my daughter is 3 months old. So they're both little tykes. So I was actually just editing a video before I hopped on with you I got to play at Creation Fest last year, and so I was editing this little you know kind of tour vlog thing that I put together, and it was so crazy because it was almost a year ago. In fact, like next month this time it'll be a year ago since we took that drive out there, and we actually went. It was like me, and I think my wife was like pregnant with our, I think by that time she's already pregnant with our daughter. So me, my pregnant wife, and my 6-month-old son in the back seat. So I was taking a video of like driving the car of me riding the back seat, and then literally I'm sitting in the back seat giving my son a bottle while we're while we're driving out to Creation.
That's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah, dude. Yeah,
wow.
Man.
Cool.
Yeah, dude. So anyways, yeah, that's what I've been up to, man. But yeah, that's been about it. So just like, yeah, man, being a dad, being a husband, and playing music and getting connected with the local scene. So yeah, man.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah,
Good to hear from you. Thanks for taking your time out to talk.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.